In 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And welcome everyone to this episode of the Real Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Edwards. Joining us today is David Bronner, the CEO or the Cosmetic Engagement Officer at Dr. Bronner's. David, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and Cosmic Engagement Officer.
So, did I say cosmetic today?
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, it makes sense.
We're cosmic.
Yeah. Why is it we're cosmically engaging with our cosmetic products. Aside from soap, we actually got lip balms and lotions and all kinds of cosmetics, so it makes sense.
Okay, now that makes sense. Now, why is it cosmic then?
Cosmic, well, I guess, that kind of gets into the origin story. So that was my granddad's, passion project was to unite spaceship Earth, lightning-like in a new birth, across religious and ethnic divides. And, was felt urgently called in a nuclear armed world that at the next Holocaust, if we didn't realize our transcendent unity, and that all the faith traditions at their heart are speaking about the one true religion of love. And that if we didn't realize that and continued to demonize and disrespect each other, and that the next Holocaust we would all perish. And and just had this basic cosmic vision of peace on earth, living sustainably in harmony with nature. So I would say like kind of the most in my generation. My brother's 50-50 with me, Mike Bronner, he's a president. I'm kind of maybe a little more tapped in on my granddad's wavelength. So when I promoted my brother to president, he promoted me to Cosmic Engagement Officer. So CEO, yeah. But yeah, so my granddad, his granddad, so my great grandfather first began making soap in a small Jewish home in Laupheim, a southern German town, in 1858. And my granddad's dad, my great grandfather, Bertold, he and two of his brothers had expanded the family enterprise to one of the largest soap manufacturers in Germany, and we're based in Heilbronn. And we had a big factory, and we're making all the liquid soaps in the washrooms throughout Germany on the Zeppelins, flying around. And my granddad came of age in the 20s. He was apprenticed and became a master soap maker. And when he joined the family enterprise formally, he was clashing with his dad a lot. In his late 20s, my granddad was very Zionist, very activist. His dad and uncles were like, stop mixing politics with soap. Just keep a lower profile. And and my granddad, just kind of out of the generational clash with his dad, came over to the States in Chicago in 1929 at the age of 21. And this wasn't the eventual dimensions of fascism and Hitler were not apparent at the time. It was more it was just more out of wanting to find his own path. And but he set himself up as a consultant to the U.S. soap industry, like the P&Gs of the world, and helped design factories and launch products. And met his wife Paula, my dad's mom, had 3 kids. But with the rise of Hitler, was increasingly desperate to get his family out. And his 2 sisters got out. One, Lottie got out in 36 and ended up in a kibbutz in Israel. Then Palestine, now Israel. And Louisa got out in 38, right before they closed the borders. And she became a professor of German at UMass Boston and wrote poetry in Hebrew, German, and English, very much on my granddad's wavelength of unity and realizing our, sister and brotherhood across cultural divides. Really, really amazing woman. And then his parents, like a lot of bourgeois Jews, thought they were going to ride out the madness. Stayed until it was too late. The factory was Aryanized in 1940, and they were deported and killed shortly after. Wow. And at the same time, his wife, Paula, my dad's mom, got sick and died when my dad was 2. And so this is all happening in like the early 40s. So just immense personal tragedy for my granddad. And his response to this was, somehow in the midst of this immense tragedy was having these like mystical experiences and realizations that that all the faith traditions at their heart are pointing at this transcendent mystery that we are all children of, and that, you know, every man and woman prays to God in his or her own language, and there's no language that she doesn't understand, and felt urgently called to go promote this vision of peace to the world. He felt in a nuclear armed world, we were going to all kill ourselves if we didn't realize this. He was going around the country lecturing, and he was selling his, by that time, old-fashioned soaps on the side. And because in the post-World War II era, it was better living through chemistry. We were transitioning all kinds of industry to petrochemicals and synthetic chemistry, and, you know, we had synthetic fertilizers, plastics, like, you know, in personal care. So natural soaps were out of fashion. It was all about synthetic petrochemical surfactants and moisturizers. And my granddad early on saw the danger of this transition, and that, you know, he brought kind of the German green ethic with him, of living simply in harmony, and was a real ecological visionary. And, but he, you know, primarily he was all about his message, and word got out that there was this guy with this really good soap, and people were coming to get the soap and not hearing what he had to say. And that's when he started to download his message onto all of our labels of our soap. So our labels are pretty famous, having like 3,000 words of my granddad's philosophy. But it's pretty genius, because you forget a magazine, going to the bathroom, and he's got you. And it wasn't really till the 60s and the rise of the counterculture that the soap really took off. A whole generation basically dropped out. You know, like, this is the era of Silent Spring, Rachel Carlson. All the pesticides were killing songbirds. It was this widespread awakening. The environmental movement got off the ground. That, you know, we're living through the 6th great extinction event. Ecosystems are in collapse. We cannot be living like we are, like our whole capitalist consumer society, with no thought to the environmental and social impacts. Like, this is, you know, obviously leading us off the climate change cliff. And, you know, he was, you know, so with this generation in the 60s, and then this war machine that wouldn't stop, you know, here, so this whole generation, you know, they're looking for more authentic, simple, natural products. And, you know, here's a soap that's concentrated, biodegradable. You can wash your hair, your dishes, your dog by the side of the river and not worry about it. And a really cool message of peace on the label. And that's when the soaps really took off. And then with the rise of the health food movement, you know, my granddad basically tracked that. And our soap, he ran it as a nonprofit religious organization. The IRS disagreed with his tax-exempt status, and we reorganized. We were in bankruptcy, and reorganized as a for-profit. And actually, that's when my dad and mom and uncle entered the picture. So I grew up in Glendale, in a suburb of LA. My dad went to the Navy, so my granddad wasn't the best father. He basically parked his 3 kids in a series of foster homes, while he went around on his, you know, cut on his mission to save the world. And he checked in, you know, pretty regular, and financially supported them, but was basically absent. And my dad, when he was 17, went and joined the Navy, served 8 years, came back out, and was working with my granddad, but it was really fractious. And my dad would oversee the soap manufacture at a chemical specialty firm in LA. And when my granddad decided to move down to Escondido in North County, San Diego, my dad stayed up, and he eventually became the head of operations at this other chemical specialty company, and continued to oversee the bulk manufacture of the soap, which he shipped down to Escondido, but then also developed a whole bunch of other products like firefighting foam for structure and forest fires, and then a version of the foam for Hollywood. So me and my brother grew up blasting foam on trees to make it look like snow. And then my dad, when my granddad got sick and he was paying all these back taxes because all these bad advisors, my dad and uncle and my mom kind of entered the picture and righted Dr. Bronner's, got out of bankruptcy, put it on sound financial footing as a for-profit. But really, we have that nonprofit kind of DNA to the core of our mission. We were a social enterprise before the term existed. And growing up, like me and my brother, my granddad was a very intense guy. And for him, it was very important that his grandkids understood the message, and that we must unite Spaceship Earth. We're all one or none. And, this stuff was sailing way over our heads. We're like, okay, I knew he was just coming from the mountaintop 24/7. And it wasn't really till college and some early psychedelic experiences that I had, specifically with a mushroom chocolate in junior year. I was at Harvard, and I'd rejected I wasn't very spiritual at that time, but was also pretty dissatisfied with the kind of reductionist vision that was being kind of downloaded via biology. And human consciousness is just another adaptive trait, not that big a deal. I was like, well, I think there might be something more going on here. And I remember in the mushroom, just having the mushroom chocolate, that just kind of was looking down at my arm and thinking like, wow, what does it mean? Like at a quantum level, like I'm not different from the world. Like at a quantum energetic level, it's just one continuum. Hmm. And when I eat and I poop, like the world's flowing through me, energy's pouring through me. And I'm not even the same stuff like month to month. I'm like different blood, I'm different stuff. And I'm not going to even be here in that long. And I'm like part of a way bigger reality process and the world is alive and I'm just part of it. And just like really had this like kind of first unity experience and like kind of like what I didn't quite associate at the time with my granddad's vision, but in hindsight was like one of the first, setting me on my path to really understanding what my granddad was talking about. Mm-hmm. He's talking about we're all one, like, yeah. And it wasn't really till after college, and I was in Amsterdam, and in college I kind of retired from alcohol culture and just realized that cannabis was like a way better vibration, and just being with my friends and playing music, and alcohol has its place, but I just really was appreciating just the higher vibration that cannabis held, when responsibly approached and used. And so Amsterdam, of course, in '95 was kind of the mecca. And went to Amsterdam and just really, it's such an open, tolerant society. And I met people that were facing like 10 years to life, like the most beautiful, gentle hippies, vegetarians you would ever meet. And they're facing 10 years of life if they go back in the US. And they had formed a church in Arkansas in 1993 with cannabis as a sacrament to make a First Amendment constitutional challenge. And they'd gotten broken up by the feds, and a lot of them were in jail. And I was just like, man, what kind of country is doing this? So these beautiful people are going to be locked up for the rest of their lives. And just like really kind of woke up to the drug war, in large part being a war on cannabis as a proxy of going after the counterculture, like that whole cultural split in the 60s. And it was basically a proxy for the authorities to go after the counterculture. And before that, it was racist policy to go after Mexican and African Americans from, back when marijuana was first made illegal in the 30s. Just really getting, I guess, my political awakening. And, that this is the sacrament of my people. This is helping us be our better, higher vibrating selves. And, this is so ridiculous that we're, wasting so much law enforcement, taxpayer resources with something that can be so helpful to helping us, be better people. And, and then in the same time frame, I had some even more intense psychedelic experiences and really experienced the light and the love at the heart of reality that my granddad has been talking about. And I hadn't understood at all what he was talking about. But all of a sudden I'm like, holy moly, all the faith traditions are pointing at this. It's like beyond anything. And, religion gets problematic when it takes its beliefs serious, like it makes idols and says, your God's not my God, that kind of stuff. But when it's open, these are all paths to the heart. I mean, it's all about the one true religion of love. And that was my granddad was all about. And so it wasn't like a straight path from there to Dr. Bronner's, but, more or less within a couple of years, realized that if a company like Dr. Bronner's were to offer me a job, I'd go for it in a second. And had not wanted to work for my dad, just like my dad didn't want to work for his granddad. My granddad didn't want to work for but I had gotten over that. And I was like, wow, I can work with my dad. This is amazing. And luckily I made that decision because it was right before my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And this is 98. And my granddad had just died in 97. On the same day my daughter was born, on March 7th, 97. And then my dad, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer shortly after. But luckily I'd already said, hey, I'm ready to come in. And so I got an amazing year with my dad. And then he passed in June of 98. And But shortly before he died, he oversaw, along with my mom and Uncle Ralph, my mom Trudy, who's a CFO at Bronner still, and is amazing. My brother likes to say our mom still gives us our allowance. But they oversaw what was then effectively 1/3 of our entire worth or value was in the form of 1,000 acres in East County, San Diego. And my granddad had some grandiose visions of reforesting the land and bringing rains to the semi-arid region. And it wasn't like super practical. And my dad, against the counsel of a lot of our advisors, were saying, no, you gotta sell that land to cover the estate taxes from my granddad. My dad, was like, adamant, no, we can afford to do this and we're going to do it. And we gave that land to the Boys and Girls Club of San Diego. And, and it really set the example for me and my brother. Like, this is what we do. If we can, we got to be responsible custodians of the business and make sure we're running a profitable, sustainable, successful enterprise. But anything we don't need for the business, we're going to give it to the charities and the causes we believe in. And we implemented a 5-to-1 compensation cap. So I don't make any more than 5 times our lowest paid position. And we basically give all our money that we don't need for the business to the causes we believe in. And when I joined in 98, when I stepped up, we did 5 million. And last year we crossed 130 million, and we're able to give $7.5 million away to charity. So that's basically kind of running it. And we're, now we're organized as a benefit corp, and we just very much run it and try to honor both my granddad and my dad examples. So my dad, in a way, kind of closing the loop with honoring the youth mentoring programs that really helped him when he was a kid. And my dad was very much about practical, family and community, and not the cosmic vision. And whereas my granddad was all 24/7 on the cosmic tip. So I think me and my brother, we really try to kind of honor both of them. And, what can you do practically in the world to make the world better? I mean, it's great to want to have peace on earth, but, how do we get there? And I think, some of the most important things we've done is take responsibility for our supply chains, realizing that as cool as what we do here in San Diego is only less than 10% of our impact as far as the people and the land involved. It's the farmers and the workers growing our coconuts and olives, turning that into oil. There's so much more land-based impact. There's so many more workers and farmers involved. And, making sure they're getting a fair price and making sure they're farming in a way that really takes care of their land and isn't ripping the fertility out of the soil and poisoning the farm workers' bodies with pesticides. And so that's, I don't know, I guess I'm maybe going a little far afield here, but we're, really trying to honor my granddad and my dad in everything we do. I guess that's basically the story of where we're at.
We'll talk about Cosmos and Cosmic Engagement Officer, man. That's some crazy stuff right there. I mean, what do you think that is, though, when you think of the transfer of generations, the transfer of wealth, the transfer of emotions, the transfer of energy? What do you think that is that's in you, that's telling you to make these ethical decisions that your grandfather and your father had set forth?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the soul, it's tapped in, and that's, I think, trying to be true to your own soul is kind of the game. And, it's got the wisdom, and it's tapped in with the ancestors. I mean, I feel in a way closer to my dad now than when he was alive. Just grown a lot since he died. And, I mean, I think, thank God for my parents. I think they really helped develop a real conscience in me and my brother and sister. A real sense of responsibility and family and taking care of people. So I credit my parents a lot. And then, and then I guess the, psychedelic, plant medicine, allies. I mean, these are really important. That's in part what I've dedicated my life to is responsible integration of psychedelic therapy. I feel, if you look at indigenous cultures that have ceremonial use of peyote or ayahuasca or iboga, they approach these medicines with a lot of reverence, a lot of care. and they can just be very, very transformative and really help us access, deeper levels of ourselves, get in touch with our deep soul and really help kind of reset self-destructive patterns of thought and behavior, addiction, depression, anxieties. A lot of these epidemics that Western pharma has very little, is not being very successful at addressing. These more indigenous medicines have amazing potential and can really help activate get us in touch with the love and the ethics at the heart, earth care, love of one another and, custodianship of earth, just really connecting us with nature. So, yeah.
Well, this unifying message, like one faith, everything that was printed on the bottles, that the whole message that your grandpa was preaching to people during that time, is this, and obviously it's passed on to you, is this, that's just real. I'm just trying to think about this. Help me out here. Is that something that's like inherent when we think about leadership? Is this something that is inherent in you? Is it learned, or is it something that is just like in your unconscious and you just haven't impacted yet until you had an experience like that?
Yeah, man, I did. Well asked, well put, and it's both. I think definitely, I think the ancestral wisdom and presence is a factor for sure. And, thank you so much, Grandpa, my dad. Definitely in my unconscious, and generational trauma, the Holocaust, all that, it's, the fires of the Holocaust were behind my granddad. And, he wasn't the best dad, but he's doing the best he could with the immense tragedy he was facing. My dad did the best he could. Hopefully I'm doing the best I can. We're just trying to elevate the vibration, process that trauma that's coming down along with the gifts, kind of get that complex karmic inheritance of, the good and the bad. And luckily in my case, I think it was a lot more good than bad. And but I think definitely peers. I don't want to, also want to just shout out, there's a lot of other very influential people in my life and examples in business, socially responsible business. Guayaki, the yerba mate company, they're pretty much now distributed 7-Eleven and everywhere. So it's like the bright yellow cans. But it's all a fair trade, organic yerba mate, which is like the green tea grown in South America. And they went to market in partnership with the Guayaki tribe in, I think, Paraguay, and enable them to sustain their livelihood in the rainforest and grow the yerba mate sustainably and make it so that it was more productive than chopping the forest down, and are basically, engaged in rainforest preservation and traditional livelihoods of the tribe. And, just really woke the consciousness, hey, I don't know, we were buying coconut oil and olive oil on price and spec like everyone else from brokers with no transparency or visibility to where it's coming from. We had no idea who the farmers were or what kind of conditions it was. And that's the race to the bottom around the world. It's because we're being unconscious about what we're purchasing that just incentivizes huge, multinational companies that go set up plantations in the most countries with the most lax social and environmental regulation, which is the lowest cost of production. And that's what's ruining the earth. So, really penetrating that situation and setting up direct trading relationships with our farmers around the world. For coconut oil, we have a sister company in Sri Lanka that produces coconut oil in partnership with 1,000 farmers. It grew out of a tsunami relief project. Olive oil comes primarily from Palestinian farmers in the West Bank, but the balance from the Israeli side, half from a Jewish family farm and half from an Arab Christian project. So there's Muslim, Christian, Jewish olive oil in our soap. It's really resonating to the all one message. Palm oil is a very destructive ingredient, the way it's generally farmed. We're showing how you can do it in a really sustainable, regenerative way. Just the example, there's this other, there's just people who have really shown the way, hey, why don't you think about this? This is how you can do it better. And So I'm always learning and just, there's just people who are really setting good examples and people showing up at the right time in life, just with the right message. And sometimes I'm a hard learner. Sometimes I get it quickly, but yeah, I think, but just with the fundamental ethic, like, how do you leverage business to be a force of positive social change, versus a part of the problem. And, it's basically both. It's both what's driving us off the climate change cliff, and it's the solution. If we can just like be conscious about how we're running our business and make it benefit society as a whole, I think we can do it.
Well, you said you're learning. I mean, as am I, and as I think everyone else is. And I think there's a big misconception. I always ask people, what is your definition of a real leader? And, the ones I really respect are the ones that embody the concerted effort of, like you mentioned, the timing, the other people that are involved, because that's all this is. It's the right timing. It's the right people. It's the right things, that the conscious decisions that we make, and the learning. It's everything combined, and it's very hard to describe. That's why I don't think there's one answer. But I would go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, one of my top talents really is to know something well enough to know who can do it way better. Yeah. And, and like kind of recruit them on as, just key allies, and, just help, inspire the team, but just, also respecting and delegating, and just having a real complementary skill set to help take us to the next level.
Well, you're thinking about regenerative soils. We talked about fair trade by giving people fair wages to provide for them and their families. A lot of things that we don't think about consciously, just like plastic waste, our pollution. And I think we're at this interregnum, this change of reigns, this change of times, change of cultures, where the cost of capitalism just can't be comfortably ignored anymore. People are waking up, like you said, the woke culture of understanding where their products come from, understanding the impact that they're having as consumers. Where do you think this is going in years to come? And do you think at one point, while you're still alive, that other companies like yourselves, competitors as yourselves, will adopt the same principles?
I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that there's some macro trends. I think the millennial generation coming up, obviously it's a very diverse cohort of people, but, there's, I think, a lot seeking authenticity and realness, and products that don't go to hell and back, before they get to you. And, awareness that climate change is we have to tackle this if we have a shot on Earth. I think, a big part of that is, transitioning our agricultural systems that covers 1/3 of the Earth's surface, and generally in a totally destructive way, and making that, how do we farm and produce our food and our fiber and ingredients for soap and everything else in a way that's, regenerates nature, or mimics nature, and is regenerative and isn't dependent on a huge amount of synthetic poisonous chemicals, that, with huge carbon footprints, eating way less animals. And I'm personally vegan for over 20 years, but I respect high animal welfare, pasture-based operations. And, I think so long as we dramatically reduce the population of livestock, get them out of their cages and these ethical environmental disasters, integrate them back into our farming ecosystem. If you look at a wild ecosystem, there's no synthetic inputs. It's fully self-regenerating. In forest, for example, no synthetic inputs, a sustainable balance of animal and plant life. How do we replicate that in our farming ecosystem? So I think, just as people get more conscious in that dimension, and then, integrate our plant medicines and psychedelic allies, set good examples, just like companies set good examples for us. We're trying to set good examples for the next wave of entrepreneurs coming up. That, hey, we don't prosper if society as a whole is not prospering, that ethic. So I don't know, I'm cautiously optimistic. It's not going to happen quickly, but I'm hopeful. I guess there's a film in Australia. I was just down in Australia, and there's a film called 2040. Haven't seen it yet, but I guess it's about a vision of like, if we do X, Y, Z, kind of all the things we know we should be doing, if we get after them, it's kind of like painting a picture. We totally decarbonize our economy, transform our agricultural landscape, pivot, away, get after public transit, just
totally,
get after all the things we know we should be doing,
Well,
yeah.
And that's going to be a great transition to this. Is I was just about to say, is like, it's the what is 2020? Near sight and far sight. What's the near sight leadership? What's the far sighted leadership? So when you're talking about the pastures, we're talking about non-GMO, things like that. What decisions are we going to make today that are going to impact tomorrow? So I got a couple questions for you, David, if you will.
Yeah.
You use non-GMO products. You also just talked about the welfare of animals and safe farming. At that time when those were being made, I think it was Borlaug, who did the genetically modified plant. It was able to feed millions and millions of people at that time, because now you're able to produce crops that are going to survive and last longer. Now we're seeing, oh wait, it's going into the water streams, it's going to the earth, the waste. So where do you stand on that in terms of being able to feed more people, as well as it's not good for the environment in a long-term point of view?
Yeah. And to clarify, we're not only non-GMO, we're actually regenerative organic. So okay. We go on beyond non-GMO. We're actually, for us, it's about conventional agriculture is this way too pesticide and synthetic fertilizer dependent. Synthetic nitrogen takes like 1 to 3% of the world's entire energy output to produce in the Haber-Bosch process. It's incredibly energy intensive, and then it destroys soil. Basically, blasting this much synthetic fertilizer and pesticide, we're destroying the soil ecosystem and oxidizing all that life that's in the soil up into the atmosphere. So we need to look at our agricultural landscape is not just about producing nutrient-dense food to feed a growing population, but then also how can we sequester carbon from the atmosphere back into our soils at global scale? It's the number one carbon sink for carbon, and even more than reforestation. If you bring a depleted soil back to life through regenerative organic management, the amount of carbon you can sequester in that soil is enormous. And when you do that, you're also drought-proofing the soil, because now it can hold a whole lot more water. So when you have a big rain event, rather than it all going off, taking all that topsoil and all the topsoil loss, that's another huge problem we've got. You're actually retaining that water. So it's, you can basically farm in a much more climate resilient way. And as far as GMOs, so, the by far the number one genetically engineered trait is Roundup resistance. So Roundup is the world's number one weed killer. So when you think about genetically engineered corn or soy and all our major food crops, there's I think it's somewhat of a misnomer that genetic engineering is feeding the world. Basically what you're able to do with these crops is farm in a way that takes less knowledge and labor. Like you can just blast huge amounts of weed killer to control your weed pressure, which is obviously a huge problem when you farm. But it's not, it's not in and of itself boosting yields. It's just enabling you to kind of take care of your weeds by blasting way more weed killer than otherwise. But the problem, and basically every weed scientist that wasn't on Monsanto, Dow, or DuPont's payroll, that, basically the pesticide industry has bought the seed industry in this country and globally to engineer our food crops to tolerate huge amounts of the weed killers that they sell. That when you blast this much weed killer, you're going to inevitably create weed resistance. And that's exactly what's happened. So now you have all these like Roundup Ready resistant weeds, so you can't kill them with Roundup anymore. And glyphosate is a chemical name. So now they're genetically engineering what's called their stacking resistance. So now they're stacking resistance to dicamba and 2,4-D. 2,4-D is one half of Agent Orange. That was a huge, defoliant used in the Vietnam War. That was very toxic. So we're blasting more and more and more toxic weed killer on our crops to bring them to harvest. And this is great for the chemical industry. This is exactly what they predicted. They said, oh, this was never going to happen. Of course, it did happen, and we're paying them a whole lot more money for their chemicals that they're selling. And then when you're saying, then they're feeding the world with these crops, it's like, well, if you look at corn, half of the corn crop is actually going into ethanol and this whole ethanol boondoggle. And then the balance is going to animal feed. I mean, there's very little corn is actually feeding anybody. It's mostly inefficiently being converted into animal energy and protein. Depending on the animal, there's like a 10 times loss of the amount of protein and energy taking a plant and making it into an animal protein just from the metabolism and just the inefficiencies of that conversion. And so I think it's something like only 18% of corn is used in any kind of food product, and most of that's the corn syrup. And then, it's like hollow calories. And then soy is something like 80% animal feed. Very little soy is actually consumed for people. So, if you farm regenerative organic, I would say, if you look at like the kind of best studies out there, like you'll see a yield drop if you're not like blasting that much synthetic nitrogen year after year. If you're actually taking care of your soils and producing sustainably and doing best regenerative practice, you can still replicate. You can get about, let's just say on average, about 80% of the yield out of a regenerative organic globe as you would out of I'm going to just turn on the chemicals and just, I don't care what happens to the world. I'm just going to maximize my calorie production per acre. And that at 80%, if you scale down the amount of animals that are, right now just inefficiently converting that into animal protein, if we reduce that and simultaneously get rid of the ethanol boondoggle, then there's plenty of land and farming for producing the food that we can eat that's not dependent on a bunch of toxic chemicals, that's driving us off the climate change cliff. But it does, it's basically about, collective behavior change and enacting policies that incentivize us to eat more plant-based meals, less meat. And, when you choose to eat animal products, eat it from a pasture-based operation where the animals are, their fertility is actually part of a cycle and not part of a problem. These huge manure lagoons. I mean, these factory farms are like burning oil wells. If you look at just the greenhouse gas emissions coming out from these factory farms of animals, like these animals in cages, it's crazy. But if you get the animals integrated into a proper cropping system, it's incredibly productive, and humane, fair, and it's just we can't eat meat and meat 3 times a day, but you can still eat plenty of meat and feed the world. So I think it's a question of just that that agriculture is more than just producing food. It's about supporting sustainable livelihoods for farms and rural economies and taking care of the animals. But obviously we need to feed the world. And I find the whole GMO I'm not in principle against it. I think there are good examples in insulin for diabetics. That's great. When they make instead of taking cow pancreases and grinding them up to make insulin, you can just engineer E. coli to produce a whole bunch of insulin. Obviously, that's good use of the technology and I have zero problem with it. But the real issue is that most of it, the feeding the world conversation in a way deflects from the fact that what's really happening is they're engineering our crops to resist weed killer, and it's in a way it's kind of distracting people from that's what they're doing. A conversation that is it's not, we can feed the world without this technology, for sure. And I'm not opposed to the technology in principle, but what it's actually doing, what's in the ground is horrible. They're engineering resistance to weed killer. I mean, that's 90% of genetically engineered crop by acreage. So, it's a nuanced issue. And, it's not that there's not examples that are good, but generally speaking, it's, we have the pesticide chemical industry is bought the seed industry and has captured our regulatory agencies. So
that's cool. I think it's really important that you share that too. And I think it's interesting times right now with this coronavirus. How is it, something like this can create behavior change for people to buy, bulks of toilet paper, of soap and things off of shelves in a week or two? Yet something that's so existential as climate change, which is going to kill more people and is killing more people in this year already, it has. It's almost like we're, like you said, like it's just out of sight, out of mind. It's that far-sighted vision. So I want to stick on this thing. You talked about agriculture. 70% of the world's food comes from smallholder farms, right? And that also consists of 70% of the world's poverty are smallholder farmers. It's an interesting asymmetry. It's an interesting dynamic. What have you found at Dr. Bronner's that has been effective in driving this behavior change to purchase your products or just be aware of what is going on in the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important point. And that, all too often, people like the cheap food that we're buying on this, the American food basket is by far the cheapest in the world. But that's because we're basically externalized the costs of the environmental and social harms that comes with that really, really cheap food. And I mean, I'm not talking about anybody who's like, struggling at the poverty line. I'm not saying that, I'm not talking about making them pay more money, but everyone who can afford to, I mean, really needs to be looking carefully at fair trade certification in organic, because like you say, I mean, so many smallholder farms around the world, I mean, they're in the poverty trap. There's a lot of predatory intermediary brokers, lending at like ridiculous interest rates, finance crops like 30%. It's just, it's a real struggle. And so that's, that consciousness of fair trade. I mean, it arose around coffee and cocoa, which have, like really volatile commodity markets, and small farmers are just routinely like getting screwed when the global prices would collapse below cost of production. And yeah, fair trade, it's basically about, forming long-term stable trading relationships with your farmers and going to market in partnership. And yeah, I think as far as promoting that consciousness, I don't know if I mentioned, but we're in partnership with Patagonia, the big clothing company. That's we're launching the Regenerative organic standard, and it's basically taking organic as a baseline, and then taking the top pasture-based animal welfare criteria, top fair labor criteria, top soil health criteria, and merging it in one single standard that's going to be consumer-facing, like the USDA organic program, but basically even better. Because USDA organic is kind of like what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't use synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, but it's not saying what you should do. Like you should, so Regenerative organic is saying like this is what you should be doing. And so we're excited by this new seal, this new there'll be a big consumer education campaign behind it. And yeah, we're really trying to get consumers to realize that their plate is a farm, their fork is a pitchfork, their knife is a butchering knife. Like really taking responsibility for what does your farm look like? Really connect. Like, does it look like a monoculture desert of genetically engineered weed killer soap, dead stuff, or is it like a vibrant living ecosystem? Really diverse farm, like a whole lot of wildlife, biodiverse wildlife. Just like a real good farm is so beautiful. I mean, it's just a farming nature's image. There's a lot of complexity and diversity. It's just birds are singing. Versus the monoculture deserts out in like Nebraska. It's just nuts.
Wait a second. I'm putting two and two together right now. Are you in talks with Vincent Stanley at Patagonia at all?
I don't. I know Rose and the CEO Rose Macario, and then Phil Graves.
Okay.
I know a bunch of people over there, but I don't know Vincent. Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's been with Patagonia since its inception, and when it was the hardware climbing company. And I think he had mentioned he knew some people at Dr. Bronner's he wanted me to put in touch with because I live in San Diego. So we got to connect sometime too.
I may know Vincent. I'm like terrible with names.
It's okay. But regardless, we got to connect sometime on this. But I think there's an interesting parallel here because for people listening to this for the first time, what David's referring to is Patagonia's work with their supply chain. They cut so many suppliers out because they had visited their farms, the areas where they were making the fabrics, the dyes in the water. They saw the birds dying on the side, farmers shooting the birds. and they said they want to work with these companies, but it's that social responsibility, that environmental responsibility that was integrated into their company, which has made them so successful. But what I'm trying to get to, David, is at the beginning of this podcast, you were talking about the vision of the company not being not being really or pertaining to soaps. It was the one faith. It doesn't really pertain to soaps. And there was some debacle going back and forth with the family members. Now, do you think the mission of the company has to pertain to the product and the service that it's selling? Or do you think it has to pertain to a social or environmental ideology?
Yeah, well, definitely both. So we've got our 6 cosmic principles, and it's basically kind of encompasses a lot. But I like this triangle. My brother kind of out of nowhere about a year ago started talking about our triangle. I was like, "What triangle?" And he's like, "Okay, we got soap on one point, and that symbolizes like running an efficient business. Delivering the best soap every time, quality. You're going to have the most amazing aromatherapeutic experience. Just all the traditional things you need to rock to deliver, a good product, a good service, in a great way, and if we're not doing that, then we're not generating profits. We're not able to do all the rest of the good stuff we want to do. And then soul. So you got soap, and then you got soul. So soul's like that, that mission, like how are we making the world better? In what way are we engaged in our community, with a larger earth? Just what way are we just trying to leverage our profits to further benefit the larger ecosystem we're in? And, and I think every company needs to be, doing that. I think most companies at least realize they need to look like they're doing that. But hopefully more and more companies are really, dedicating themselves to the triple bottom line, the profit, social benefit, environmental benefit. And, but then joy is the other point of the triangle, like just to have a good time while you're doing it. My dad, that foam that I referenced is so ecstatic. It's so fun to blast foam on each other. And we have a whole event marketing department that their whole mission is to just blast foam on people. And that's a symbol of just generally having a good time in life and making sure, so you got to make a great product, good service, do good in the world, but then also have a good time doing it. I think those are the three essential things.
It's the all faith trinity right there.
Yeah.
There we go. Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool stuff. So now for you personally, I know I want to get back to this. We were talking about, your activist efforts into cannabis as well as into psilocybin.
Yeah.
Why go into these? Why try to promote these natural ingredients? Why try to go into this space? I had a conversation with the late and great, Paul Stamets back in August, and he was saying, psilocybin. Well, it's one, you can't ban a species; they were here longer than we were, and then 2, it's a harm reduction tool. We are paying. I just wrote it down. We are paying so much money in taxes for his son. His son's in prison right now. For his son to be in prison, what harm would it be to give one of, a member of our society one of these natural substances to reduce the chances of someone in our culture to commit a crime? It's an interesting point. So, and for your research that you've done in this, what have you found, and what do you think the long-term benefits could be of psilocybin?
Yeah. So, psilocybin, that's the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And it's what's referred to as one of the classic hallucinogens, along with LSD, and is like incredibly powerful at, there's different levels to this, but, therapeutically, can really help, people who are really depressed, have experienced a lot of trauma. Pretty much everyone on earth has experienced some level of trauma, and, some of us, a lot of trauma. And when you've been traumatized / socialized in whatever way, it's like, let's say you have a father that beat the shit out of you, or you didn't have a father and you just came up on the streets, and, it's just you're just damaged in like really powerful ways. And, behavior patterns later in life. You could just have really self-destructive thoughts and the ways you look at yourself in a deep, way that you're not conscious about, and the way you act out on that. Maybe it's through addiction to, really hard opiates, or, you're in turn beating your wife, or, just the ways a cycle of trauma and abuse like perpetuate. And these psychedelic medicines that, mushrooms, that came out of the Mazatec Indians in southern Mexico, and these, peyote and iboga. There's these indigenous ways of healing and relating that can just really help people process like deep trauma and deep suffering, really kind of heal in a really deep way, and, stop being antisocial. Like, just really like, what's going on in there? And like, you just kind of activate this inner healing process. And oftentimes, like, you get into a real spiritual level, like you really get in touch with like this benevolence and love that permeates existence, that is quite amazing and mystery. But somehow in the midst of all of it, that's the truth. And so that these plant medicine allies can really tap us in to that real healing, magical love, and waken in us like a care and a compassion for each other and for the planet. So I think, Paul's idea there that, helping our brothers and sisters inside prison, who are often the most traumatized among us, to, really have access to these therapies. And then, but the rest of us, all of us can use a lot of help with just the difficulties and struggles of life. And these are just like amazing, amazing medicines, and they need to be approached responsibly. I think that's what's been missing a little bit in our culture, is like, when you look at an indigenous culture, you never ever like take them and, just go to a concert. And I'm not saying that's not a bad thing. That can be a very powerful, beautiful experience, but that can also go sideways, and it's very distracting. But, like, if you're in but when you set your intention, you make sure you're with somebody who's experienced, and you minimize the distractions, and you can really go inward. You really prepare yourself. I really want to be better. I want to touch in with love. I want to understand my family, and I want to honor my dad. And I want to, you set your intentions in this really conscious way. It's just really amazing what, just the power of healing and, connection and reconnection to nature and to yourself and each other. So, in a way, I feel like it's the most on point with my granddad's cosmic vision of unity on earth. And, I really feel that widespread integration, responsible integration of psychedelic therapy can really help people overcome their prejudice, kind of the fears and anxieties and the tendencies to demonize immigrants and other people, and just kind of create a more compassionate citizenry that can enact more, progressive policies that can,
right,
just help us all be better. So.
Right. And I think there's an interesting, again, another parallel there in terms of Paul was trying to make the case, and I'm probably going to botch this, but he was trying to say, I'd like to rewrite Darwinian theory. It's not about the survival of the fittest. It's about basically the common people, the common good in a community. It's how community survives that passes on traits to the next generation. It's a collective effort, back to our collective leadership. And I think that really resonates with me for what you're saying today, with everything you're doing for your stakeholders, for the fair wages, for those people, for the soils, for the supply chain, for your distribution, for the messaging, the vision, all of those components, the Trinity, the joy, the soap, the soul, all of those components are working together simultaneously. And it's just an interesting parallel between there. I wonder if there's just something to that, whether we're in business or in life.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think it's a collaborative vision. Darwin is, I guess, evolution operates, not solely on competition, but also cooperation. Obviously the humanity, like forming these deep social bonds and be able to cooperate is been key. And I think it's just about overcoming a tribal mindset where there's an other outside, either you're inside our tribe or you're outside, but that recognizing the whole earth as our tribe, and just kind of like getting us to there is, I think, a big piece of it. But yeah, man, all working together. They're all in cahoots.
So this is the question I really wanted to ask you today, and now it means a completely different thing to me. But to you, what makes a good soap?
Well, I guess at the basic physical chemistry level, it's all about high lathering oil. So what's called a high lauric oil, which means a saturated. So all oils are triglycerides. You have a glycerin backbone and 3 fatty acids, and the length of those fatty acids and the amount of double bonds makes the different qualities of oil. So beef fat versus olive oil, it's all about the kind of fatty acids that are in the triglyceride. So coconut is a high lauric oil, and lauric is a 14 carbon chain, saturated, no double bond. It's very high lathering, a really good cleanser in even hard water. And then, but it can be a little harsh. Whereas then olive oil is like a longer carbon chain, an 18 carbon chain with a double bond. And that translates to a much more emollient, smooth, moisturizing lather. And then hemp seed oil is 18 carbon chain, but then it has a bunch of fatty acids that are 2 or even 3 double bonds. And so it's even more emollient. So it's all about like basically kind of getting the right balance of high lather cleansing and emollient smoothness. So I think we do a real good job of like really getting the balance right, so that you have a very effective soap as far as cleansing and getting you and your house clean. But then it's also very smooth and emollient, not super drying after feel. It's like a very smooth, moisturizing after feel. So I think it's and what makes a bad soap is just a lot of cheap tallow, beef tallow, and being used instead of like olive oil. And then a lot of quote unquote liquid soaps aren't even soap; they're just detergents. They're just like complete schlock. So,
Well, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth, but I had this epiphany, like you had this epiphany. I've been struggling with calling a business as a force for good. It's common terminology in our space, in the sustainable social impact space, the conscious capitalism space. And I struggle with that because I think, like I'm a capitalist. I think a lot of businesses are good. Every business is good if it's helping people. But after this conversation, when I asked you what a good soap is, to me, the molecules and the chemicals are great. But to me, what's a good soap is everything that is like what we said, everything that's concerted, everything that's collectively into that soap.
Yeah.
It's all those things. And those chemicals, I know exactly where they're coming from, and I know exactly what good they're doing in the community and for the rest of the world on this big, like you said, this one faith, this one earth. That's what I think a good business is. And I've never said it before. I've always been against saying that. But I think, it really resonated through this conversation today. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, right on, man. And we actually term it constructive capitalism. We're not against capitalism, but we're against it per se. We're against, unconscious capitalism, but when it's conscious and constructive, you can do amazing things. So,
So David, from all of our conversations today, we unpacked a lot today about the history, talked a lot about the one religion trinity, the concerted effort, climate change, the 2040 vision. From all of this today, let's bring this full circle. What is your definition of a real leader?
Yeah, I think, kind of able to set a vision and inspire people to kind of, to execute on it, help, identify the right team, help smooth out the rough edges and enable full team flow to like accomplish something that none of us individually could ever do. So I guess, inspire and, manage in a light way, lead from behind kind of thing, just delegate, kind of Genghis Khan style, delegate a lot of power to his cons. We got some pretty powerful directors and, just make sure they're rocking and kind of checking in, but setting a vision where everyone is so invested in that shared vision and mission that I think we get out of our people something that is very unique.
Give them the joy.
Yeah, right on, man.
There we go. Well, David, I appreciate your time coming on the Real Leaders podcast today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. We didn't know where this conversation was going to go today, and I'm glad it went exactly where it was, because that's the only way they could have done it today. So I just want to appreciate your time coming back on the Real Leaders podcast. For David Bronner, I'm Kevin Edwards, asking you to go out there and always, folks, keep it real. Thanks, David. Appreciate you.
Right on. Yeah, thank you, Kevin, man.